Emotions were never the enemy, but most of the world learned to treat them like intruders that have to be managed, suppressed, or justified. You were taught that feeling too much makes you unstable, that feeling too little makes you cold, that the only acceptable state is a narrow middle band of "I fine," where nothing disturbs the surface too much. But the truth is far older and far stranger than any of those rules. Long before the human nervous system formed, long before a brain could fire or a hormone could release, there were currents of awareness moving through the field of source itself. And those currents were emotional tones, not reactions, not moods, architectures. An emotional tone is a way consciousness arranges itself on the inside. Imagine that instead of thinking in sentences, your oversoul thinks in resonance, where the human mind uses words and images to make sense of experience. The oversoul uses felt harmonics. A shift in resonance becomes a message. A pattern of resonance becomes identity. When that architecture passes through a human body, it feels like joy, grief, shame, awe, numbness, rage, relief, compassion. But behind every sensation is structure. Behind every wave is design. You have felt this without having language for it. There are people you meet and you know you are supposed to like them, but something in you recoils even though they have done nothing wrong. There are places you walk into and your whole body exhales, even when nothing special has happened yet. There are songs you hear for the first time and somehow they feel like a memory. In all of those moments, emotional tones are speaking before your mind can explain. The field of your oversoul is recognizing architecture it has built before. This is why your reactions rarely make sense if you only look at the present scene. You are trying to understand multi-generational, multi-incarnational resonance using a single day's worth of context. You tell yourself, I shouldn't be this upset. It's not that big of a deal. And on the surface, you are right. The event is small, but the tone it touched is not. You are not only reacting to what happened in front of you, you are reacting to what that moment connects to in your field. Emotional tones are like chords. Every new experience either adds a note, resolves a note, or strikes the exact same vibration you have been carrying for lifetimes. When you understand this, you stop asking, why am I feeling this? As if the feeling is irrational by default, and you start asking, what architecture is this sensation belonging to? Instead of treating emotions as enemies that hijack you, you begin to treat them as messengers that arrive from deeper layers of yourself. The intensity of a feeling stops being proof that you are broken and becomes proof that something important is being touched. The uncomfortable part is that emotional tones do not care about your schedule, your image, or your plans. They care about coherence. Coherence is when who you are on the surface matches who you are under the surface. Incoherence is when you have to suppress large portions of your internal architecture just to function in the roles you have agreed to play. Emotional tones are the oversoul's way of correcting incoherence. When a life you built no longer matches the resonance you are becoming, the tones start to push. They tighten in your chest when you say yes to something that should have been a no. They sink in your stomach when you betray yourself to keep the peace. They surge as anxiety when you stay too long in a situation that your deeper self has already left. The tone is not punishing you. It is pulling you toward alignment. This is why avoiding your feelings never really works. You can numb, distract, rationalize, spiritualize, intellectualize, but the tone does not disappear. It simply waits. Emotional architecture is patient the way tectonic plates are patient. It will sit beneath your life for years if it has to, building pressure until the moment arrives when you either collapse under it or finally decide to listen. From the human point of view, this looks like a breakdown or a sudden crisis. From the Oversoul's point of view, it is a structural adjustment that has been preparing itself for a long time. Inside Viharat, the Driftway Pools exist as a teaching field for emotional resonance. The keeper of that field, Seluan Rhea, does not fix anyone. She does not intervene to stop the tones. She thickens the atmosphere so that emotional architecture becomes visible. Imagine walking into a space where your own feelings float around you like living constellations, where the ache in your chest appears as a fractured pattern of light, and the quiet joy in the background of your life appears as a slow golden spiral that refuses to extinguish. In that field, it becomes obvious that emotion is not just in your head. It is a pattern your oversoul is currently running. Even without consciously visiting a place like that, you already touch the Driftway principle every time you pause long enough to feel yourself honestly. The reason most people are terrified of their inner world is not because the emotions themselves are unbearable, but because the architecture they reveal threatens the structures they have built on top of it. If you admit that you are deeply lonely inside a relationship everyone else thinks is perfect, you risk having to change something. If you admit that your job feels dead even though it impresses people, you risk losing the identity you built around achievement. To protect the outer structure, you learn to mute the inner tones. But muting does not erase. It only delays the moment when the inner architecture grows strong enough to override the roles. At some point in almost every life, the oversoul decides that coherence matters more than stability. Emotional tones begin to spike. Old patterns of numbness stop working. The distractions lose their flavor. You try to do the same things you always did to avoid yourself, and suddenly they feel dull or even nauseating. The soul has turned up the volume. When that happens, you can interpret it as punishment, as failure, as proof that you are regressing, or you can recognize what is actually occurring. The architecture underneath your personality is shifting. The resonance that once held your life together is being rewritten. Parts of you are trying to expire gracefully while other parts are trying to be born. Of course it feels chaotic. Of course it feels like you don't know who you are. You don't. The you who knew itself through the old tones is dissolving, so a new structure can take its place. The more you resist that process, the more violent it feels. The more you agree to feel it, the more it becomes recognizable as labor rather than collapse. You start to see that grief is not just pain. It is the sound of an old architecture releasing its claim on your future. You see that anger is not just volatility. It is a boundary tone rising to protect a part of you that finally refuses to be erased. You see that shame is not proof that you are wrong at the core. It is a distorted tone trying to keep you small enough to stay acceptable to an old environment. When you read emotion at the level of tone, everything that used to look like chaos starts to look like engineering. When you begin to work with your emotions as tones, you stop asking them to be pleasant and you start asking them to be honest. You stop evaluating whether a feeling is positive or negative, and instead ask whether it is aligned or misaligned, clean or tangled, current or echo. You learn to sense the difference between a feeling that belongs entirely to this moment and a feeling that has pulled ancient threads up with it. You also begin to recognize that not every intensity requires a story. Sometimes the oversoul is simply flushing old resonance through the system, and the most skillful thing you can do is breathe, witness, and let it move. None of this means abandoning boundaries or common sense. It does not mean letting every feeling dictate your behavior. It means honoring that emotional tones are the first draft of your next self, not the enemy of your current one. You can feel the architecture without acting it out in ways that harm you or others. You can say something in me is furious without assuming that the outer world must immediately bend to that tone. You can say something in me is grieving without insisting that the grief is the whole truth about your life. When you treat emotions as tones, you give them room to evolve instead of freezing them into permanent identities. Slowly, almost without noticing, you become a different kind of human. You become someone who can sit with a feeling long enough to hear what it is actually trying to say. You become someone who recognizes that every surge, every dull ache, every sudden lightness is a structural signal from your oversoul about where you are in your own becoming. The world still happens. People still behave unpredictably. But instead of being tossed around inside your own body, you start to navigate by resonance the way a sailor navigates by stars. The sea does not change, but your relationship to it does. And in that quiet, a new respect rises, not just for your emotions, but for yourself as the one capable of holding them. You realize that the ability to feel deeply is not a liability you must overcome to be spiritual or successful or stable. It is the very capacity that allows your oversoul to sculpt something meaningful out of this life. Emotions are not proof that you are failing at awakening. They are proof that awakening is actively happening. They are the tools, the blueprints, and the raw material all at once. When you finally stop waging war against them, you discover that they were never trying to break you. They were trying relentlessly to make you real. You begin to notice that emotional tones don't simply rise and fall. They speak in sequences. A subtle tightening in the chest followed by a strange clarity in the mind is not random. It is a shift from fragmentation into focus. A numb heaviness followed by a sudden desire to clean or change your environment is not moodiness. It is the oversoul preparing a dissolution. A sense of dread that appears for no reason and vanishes when you tell the truth you've been avoiding is not anxiety. It is misalignment collapsing as soon as honesty passes through it. The more you learn to watch the sequences, the more you realize you are not experiencing chaos. You're experiencing choreography. This is why spiritual bypassing always fails. You cannot meditate a tone away that came to restructure you. You cannot positively affirm your way around an emotional architecture that has been in motion long before your current personality was constructed. You cannot stay high vibration while ignoring the tones your oversoul is throwing like anchors into the depths of your identity. When a tone demands to be felt, it is because the structure underneath it can no longer remain hidden. If you try to rise above it, you rise into fragmentation. If you descend into it fully, you descend into truth. Truth, on the level of the oversoul, is not an idea. It is resonance. A thing is true for you when your entire architecture can hold it without distortion. This is why certain truths that sound wise collapse inside you the moment you try to live them. They are not wrong in a universal sense. They are simply dissonant with your tone at this stage of your evolution. And the opposite is also true. The truths you resist the most are often the ones your architecture is closest to embodying. Emotional tones become the pressure that exposes those truths long before the mind is ready to admit them. You start to see this in the small cracks first. The irritation you feel around certain people is not always personal. It is your field sensing that you shrink around them, or contort yourself in subtle ways, or lower your tone to stay acceptable. The boredom you feel in a conversation is not disrespect. It is your architecture withdrawing energy from patterns that no longer contribute to your becoming. The sudden heaviness that enters your body in certain environments is not random fatigue. It is your tone refusing to participate in a field that does not match your direction anymore. Emotional tones communicate through the intelligence of the body, long before the mind understands what is wrong. This is why people often change their lives after a long period of something feeling off. It isn't sudden. It is the oversoul shifting tone beneath the surface again and again, until the old structure reaches its final moment of viability. By the time the human self notices, the change has already been made internally. The outer shift is simply the last step. When this happens, you will often hear someone say, "I don't know why, I just can't do this anymore." That sentence is the sound of a tone completing its work. If you listen without fear, emotional tones begin to reveal the entire timeline of your becoming. You notice that the grief you carried in your 20s softened into humility in your 30s. You notice that the anger you once feared became discernment. You notice that the shame you thought would bury you became the doorway through which compassion entered your life. You notice that the longing you tried so hard to silence is actually the voice of your future, calling you into alignment. This is not metaphor. This is emotional architecture showing its true purpose, transformation through resonance rather than force. The greatest mistake most people make is assuming that emotional tones are meant to be controlled. Control is a survival strategy, not a spiritual one. You cannot control a tone without turning against yourself. When you tighten your grip on an emotion, you freeze the architecture in place. When you judge it, you distort it. When you shame it, you exile a part of yourself that needed your presence. Emotional mastery is not control. It is attunement. It is the willingness to feel the tone accurately without collapsing into the story that tries to form around it. Human emotion always tries to build a story. The mind cannot help it. It wants causes, villains, victims, reasons, logic. Emotional tones, however, are pre-story. They are older than language. When you strip away the story, the tone becomes clear. And when the tone becomes clear, the architecture beneath it becomes accessible. You are finally able to feel what is actually happening instead of what your mind is trying to interpret. This shift from story to tone marks the moment when emotional intelligence becomes emotional clarity. Clarity does not mean comfort. It means accuracy. When a tone rises, your task is not to categorize it, but to witness it without distortion. This does not mean analyzing it for hours or trying to trace it back to an origin point. It means letting the architecture reveal itself. Sometimes grief is not about what you lost, but about what you are outgrowing. Sometimes anger is not about being wronged, but about breaking the silence around a boundary that has lived inside you for years. Sometimes fear is not a warning, but a threshold tone signaling that you are about to step into a version of yourself that your current identity cannot hold. Emotional tones are transitional gates. Every time a tone reaches its peak, a version of you approaches a moment of evolution. You can either move through the gate or reinforce the old structure. If you reinforce it, the tone will return with more strength. Not to punish you, but because the architecture still needs to shift. If you move through it, the tone dissolves and does not return in the same form again. The Oversoul does not loop lessons out of cruelty. It loops tones out of necessity. Evolution requires coherence, and coherence requires the emotional body to match the identity the soul is growing toward. This is why ignoring your emotions eventually creates a life that feels hollow or strangely out of reach. You are living in a structure the Oversoul no longer occupies. You are speaking with a voice that no longer matches your resonance. You are performing a self you have already outgrown. Emotional tones pull you back toward inhabiting your life from the inside, rather than living it from the outside. They return you to yourself, even when that return feels like breaking. But nothing breaks that isn't already cracked by truth waiting to enter. There comes a point where you stop asking how to feel better and start asking how to feel true. Better is temporary. True is structural. Emotional tones do not always bring relief, but they always bring alignment. When you stop resisting them, you begin to change your life without the violence of collapse. You make choices earlier. You speak truth sooner. You walk away before something rots. You walk toward what calls you without waiting for permission. The tones become guides rather than warnings, signals rather than alarms. You begin to trust your own resonance more than external validation. And in that trust, your entire architecture reorganizes. Eventually, you realize something that feels almost impossible at first. Emotional tones were never trying to make you suffer. They were trying to make you capable of carrying the resonance of your highest identity. You were not being tested. You were being shaped. You were not being punished. You were being aligned. You were not being overwhelmed. You were being expanded into a version of yourself that could not exist without passing through these tonal thresholds. Your emotions were not obstacles to awakening. They were the blueprint, the compass, the curriculum. And as you grow into this understanding, you no longer fear the next wave. You no longer dread the next transition. You no longer brace for impact every time something stirs inside you. You stop treating your inner world like a battlefield and start treating it like a field of communication. You begin to recognize that there is no such thing as an irrational feeling. There is only resonance you have not yet learned to read. You start listening differently. You feel differently. You respond differently. In time, emotional tones stop being storms that threaten your stability and become currents that carry you forward. You stop drowning in them and start navigating by them. You begin to sense the direction your Oversoul is trying to take you long before outer events reveal the path. The tones become early indicators of the life that is coming, not echoes of the life you are leaving. And in that shift, you realize the truth that was waiting for you all along. Your emotions are not your enemy. They are the oldest language your soul ever spoke. And every tone that rises inside you is a message from the part of you that has always known exactly who you are becoming.